I should have reminded him.
Okay, so if it's hard for people to see the screen, I guess I will read it. This is from the Ramah, commenting on the part of the Shulchan Aruch dealing with Kaddish after burial. In the Midrashim, it is found that one should recite Kaddish for a father. Therefore, they had a practice to recite the final Kaddish, meaning at the end of the services, for one's father and mother for 12 months. Likewise, there was a practice for a mourner to recite the Haftarah in the prophets and to lead the Marav services at the conclusion of Shabbat, which is the time when the souls of the departed return to Gehenna, and when the morning sun leads the services and sanctifies the name of God in public, he redeems his father and mother from Gehenna. It is the practice to recite Kaddish for one's mother, although the father is still living. The father has no right to prevent his son from reciting Kaddish for his mother. So this is the first time that somebody actually talks about saying Kaddish for a mother as well as to a father.
But we still haven't gotten to a woman saying.
We have not gotten to a woman saying it yet. We're still talking about a son.
And what year was this again, Gloria?
This is in the 1560s.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Continuing on in the Ramah. Let's see. Here we go. There is a custom that on the anniversary, the yahrzeit of a parent's death, he always recites the mourner's Kaddish for them. And this is the first time we see a reference to a saying Kaddish at a yahrzeit. One who knows how to lead the entire davening should do so. However, if there are other mourners present, it is customary that within the 7 days of their Shiva, they take precedence, and he, the one observing the yahrzeit, has no priority rights regarding the Kaddish at all. So we're still at a time when one person said Kaddish for the entire community, and he now goes on to talk about who has the priority to be that person. Also, later on in this discussion, he sort of backtracks and he says, no, they don't really say Kaddish for the full 12 months. It's really only 11 months because the wicked are punished for a full 12 months, and the mourner doesn't want anything to suggest that his deceased parent is wicked, so he stops saying it after 11 months, which is, again, our custom today. He also says mourner's Kaddish only applies to parents and not other relatives. So we're still very, very limited and still tying it in large measure to this Rabbi Akiva story. But he notes that there are some communities where the custom is developed to say it for other relatives.
This is the Ramah still?
This is the Ramah still. And then elsewhere, the Ramah does make a comment about women. And this is in the context of, do you have to tell somebody, do you have to tell the child about the death of their parent if they're living in different places and the child doesn't know? And he says, nevertheless, with male children, we have a custom to inform them of the death so they can say Kaddish. But with daughters, there is no custom whatsoever to notify them. So presumably no custom for the daughters saying Kaddish at this point. Okay, so the first time we hear anything about a daughter saying Kaddish is in the 16th century. and it's the response of Chavot Yair. So this is Rav Yair Backenrack of Germany,
Who is?
who is,
Yes.
I don't know, he's a famous posek.
Okay.
And this is like, people keep coming back to it because you can use it to support either the for or against women saying Kaddish. This is like the key response. And he starts with the question. This was done in Amsterdam and was well known there. A man died without a son and commanded before his death that 10 men should learn in his house every day throughout the 12 months after his death for pay. And after the learning, the daughter would say Kaddish. And the sages and leaders of the community in Amsterdam did not prevent her from doing this. So somebody is writing to him in Germany, asking his view about something that the rabbis in Amsterdam permitted. And his answer is, you know, well, to contradict this, meaning the girl saying Kaddish, because even a woman has a mitzvah to sanctify God's name. And there is also a minyan of men who are called Bnei Israel, and presumably they are there. She's saying it in the presence of this minyan. And even though the story of Rabbi Akiva, which is the source for an orphan saying Kaddish, occurred with a male child, in any event, it is logical that a daughter also provides benefit and peace of spirit, nachat ruach, to the soul of the deceased, since she is his offspring. So far, so good. There's no halachic reason that the girl can't say Kaddish. But, big but, nevertheless, one should be concerned that because of this act, they will weaken the power of the customs of Bnei Israel, which are also Torah, and each person will build an altar for himself according to his own logic. And when he talks about an altar, the term he uses is a bama. And that's a very loaded term because the bamot were the places where people would bring sacrifices, private sacrifices, which were prohibited at the time of the temple or the Mishkan. So it was like a breakaway. And so he concludes, therefore, in this case, which has a gathering of people and publicity, it should be prevented. And it's hard to know what he is most concerned about, whether the weakening the power of the customs of Bnei Israel, he means women have never done this before, and that is the problem, or if the problem is the breakaway minyan. Because again, if the reason the girl can't say Kaddish in shul is because there's only one person saying it for the entire community, the only way she can do it is a breakaway minyan. And maybe he's afraid that people will get the idea that, well, we can always have a breakaway minyan, and men can create a breakaway minyan if they want to say Kaddish. And so maybe it's the minyan piece more than the woman piece that's bothering him. He doesn't say. He's just very concerned that it's weakening the customs, and he talks about custom as being the equivalent of Torah, which is all really interesting. Okay, there's another fairly contemporaneous case involving a daughter saying Kaddish. This is from the Shvut Yaakov, which is Prague. And here the case is A similar kind of thing, a man who has no sons dies. He gets permission of the local rabbi for his daughter to say Kaddish for him at a minyan in his home. So that's exactly copying what they did in Amsterdam. And here, this is kind of interesting. The daughter was only 4 years old, and yet the rabbi seemed to have no problem with the idea that she could say Kaddish. And the issue was not about the girl, but whether the girl's grandfather, the father of the deceased, could say Kaddish for him in shul while the girl was saying it at home. And he starts by quoting the Ramah about how generally the custom is that only a son says Kaddish, not a father. And then he goes on, nevertheless, to appease the mind of those who die, God forbid, without sons, one might allow a father to say Kaddish for his son. But in the case before us, where he already left a daughter who recites Kaddish in the house with a minyan, because in the synagogue we surely do not allow her to say Kaddish at all, he already had peace of mind in that regard. And it appears that also with regard to the matter of prayer, the deceased's father should pray only in the house with the minyan where the daughter is saying Kaddish. But in all other prayers and recitations of Kaddish, they, meaning fathers, do not have a right. So he seems to be saying, no, the father doesn't have any right to say Kaddish in shul. And what he should be doing is being part of the minyan at which the daughter is saying Kaddish. So he is still very clear that the girl can't say Kaddish in shul, but has no problem with her saying Kaddish at home. He was from Prague. We get another response from Prague. This is the Tshuva Me'ahava. A little bit later. This is we're talking now about the early 1800s, and what he says is, I saw in the holy community of Prague a correct custom of old in the courtyard of the Kloisen synagogue. They have the custom that one who has not left after him sons, but rather young daughters, they, meaning the daughters, say Kaddish there in the courtyard of the shul. But in the synagogue, which is designated for prayer, I have never seen such a thing. And it is not proper that any woman, young or old, should come into the men's house of prayer. So, what seems to be going on here is the shuls that he's talking about basically didn't have a women's section as part of the shul. So that if the woman was going to be saying Kaddish in the presence of a minyan, she'd have to actually be in the men's section. And that seems to be what he has problems with. But again, the idea that women say Kaddish does not seem to be a problem for him if they're doing it outside the shul. And here it's not only in the home. Here he's talking about a custom where they did it in the courtyard of the shul. So we're expanding the places where they can say Kaddish, just not in the shul proper. So you'd think, hey, everything's going great, but then we get the view of the Mata Ephraim, which is the earliest really strong view that a woman shouldn't be saying Kaddish at all. And he's from Poland, and this is also the early 1800s. And he says, one who has no sons, just a daughter, and commanded before his death that 10 men shall be paid to study in his home, and following the learning, the daughter will recite Kaddish. So that's our standard procedure here to his request. And one should prevent this from being done. All the more so, one should not permit a woman to recite the Kaddish of prayer. And even if she is single, it is prohibited. All the more so if she is married, heaven forbid, to make her voice heard publicly in the synagogue or a minyan at home. So he's concerned that people will hear her voice. And he says it doesn't matter where it is, the shul, the home, her voice is her voice and is a problem.
And the problem is?
We'll get the problem is, initially you'd think Kol Isha, but he backtracks on that. But his conclusion, his solution is rather, if she wishes to bring merit to her father, she should be careful to attend all times of prayer at a synagogue or minyan and listen carefully for the recitation of Kaddish and respond Amen with proper concentration. God, who knows all thoughts, will consider it as if she fulfilled the command of her father. So he is basically saying, oops, I need a tissue. That even though he kind of agrees that Kol Isha is only a problem if she's singing, not if she's speaking, he says it's still a problem because her voice, even a speaking voice, will lead the men who hear it to improper thoughts. And she's sort of causing sin, and therefore that defeats the whole purpose of saying Kaddish. That instead of bringing merit to her father's soul, she's bringing people to violate a mitzvah, as it were. And so she's the one who has to censor herself, as opposed to the men having to not have improper thoughts from her saying Kaddish. And his solution is, no, she can just come to shul, listen to the men say Kaddish, and just say Amen, and that's as good as if she said it herself. Okay, and then we get something along the same lines by a posek from Hungary. This is now the early 1900s. This is Rav Avraham Glick. And his book is called Responsa Yad Yitzchak. And he takes the position that women can say Kaddish. And he was dealing with the question where the deceased left both an adult daughter and a grandson. So not a father this time, but a grandson. And the question was, who is it better to say Kaddish? And based on the Chavot Yair, he concludes it would be better for the daughter to say Kaddish, because the daughter definitely brings merit to her father's soul. And he says, gee, I have no idea if the grandson also does. So that's still this whole idea of Kaddish being very limited to children. But he's not so happy with this. And he says, an even better alternative is for her to hire a male Torah student to say Kaddish in memory of her father, because then it's as if it's her causing the Kaddish to be said, but she's not actually being the one who says it. Now, why that's better than a grandson, he doesn't explain.
I've never understood why, a total stranger saying it is better than, a daughter or, another relative.
Yeah, I think it's still gotta be this, Kol Isha writ light kind of thing, that there's something unseemly about people in a minyan hearing her voice. It's gotta be his undercurrent, even though, to give him credit, he says she can do it and it works, and she provides merit to her father from it. Okay, till now we've been talking about the Ashkenazi view. I want to take a little digression and look at the Sephardi approach, because what we see in the Sephardi approach is sort of an interesting progression. And then we'll come back to the Ashkenazi approach. So remember that the primary establishers of Sephardi halacha, the Rambam and the Shulchan Aruch, do not even mention the idea of women saying mourner's Kaddish. And the first we see is in a more contemporary period. This is now, I guess, the late 1800s. This is somebody named Rav Chaim Chizkiah Medini, who was the chief rabbi of the main community of Jews in Crimea. And he says, one should prevent the daughter from saying Kaddish with 10 men after the death of her father, who had commanded her to do so, for it is a new and strange thing in the eyes of the rabbis. So this is now, innovation in and of itself is a problem. Women have never done this, not in the Shulchan Aruch. They shouldn't do it. We are not permitted to change and do something innovative in the land. And even if there exists such a custom among the Ashkenazim, which we know there clearly is, at least saying it at the home, here among the Sephardim, such a thing has never been heard of, and its absence is good. And we get that view repeated again in 1942 by the first Sephardic chief rabbi of Israel, Piskei Uziel. And it's particularly surprising because I always thought of him as a more liberal posek. And I think on a number of things, he is considered fairly liberal. But he says here, it is clear that all matters of Kaddish are a received tradition from the rabbis. And as such, we should not add to their words or innovate ideas from our own minds to explain the reasons for the tradition. Therefore, we should neither add to their words nor subtract from them based on our own views, and therefore one should not innovate this custom of recitation of Kaddish by daughters. So he's clearly aware that there is this custom among the Ashkenazim, and he's basically saying, we shouldn't copy it. And he goes on to say that a man who has no sons, even if he has daughters, what he should do is teach his friend's son Torah, and the friend's son would then say Kaddish for him as if it was the man's son. It's sort of like adopt a child by teaching him Torah. A generation later, Rav Uziel's student, Rav Chaim David Halevi, moves a little bit. He becomes a little bit more progressive, but not much. He kind of says, hey, let's be real here. Having a daughter say Kaddish is now a pretty established process in the Ashkenazi community. And it's really appropriate for a daughter, just like it is for a son, because what you're really doing is bringing honor to the deceased parent. But then he says, but when a person does not merit to leave a son after him, and he has a daughter, why withhold from him the same peace of spirit and elevation of the soul that her recitation of Kaddish could give him? And particularly when he himself commanded and requested it before his death. And there is also in this a mitzvah to fulfill the words of the deceased. And the simple reason for forbidding daughters from saying Kaddish is that one would never intend to deal with holy things and in a holy place in a form and manner that are liable to cause impure, meaning sexual thoughts, even the most minor. And all different kinds of people are found in the synagogue, as is self-evident. And for this reason, in our case, I did not permit a daughter to recite Kaddish in the cemetery, for there also many men are found, and it is not the way of modesty. And also in the home, I only permitted it in a minyan composed solely of family members, and not at a time when many come to pray with the community, as is the practice in houses of mourning, because then you have the same concerns as in the synagogue, and a mitzvah does not come through a transgression. And therefore, I limited the permission to a minyan composed solely of family members to cause peace of spirit to the soul of the deceased and also to fulfill the words of his will. So again, he accepts the idea that a daughter's Kaddish is effective to bring merit to the deceased. And he's just concerned that if there are men around her, it will cause them to have impure thoughts. And he says that's the case even at home. And so the only solution he can come up with is if she can find a minyan of family members, then she can say Kaddish at home.
Exclusively
family members. So it's like he's given you something in theory, but in practice, it's hard to see that that would ever be somebody's reality, that they could, find a minyan of family members and chase away anybody else from the community who wants to come participate in the Shiva minyan. But then we get to Rav Ovadia Yosef, who actually makes some progress. And this is not from one of his published responses. This is from, he was very open to receiving questions from the public at large and responding in layman's terms in ways that were accessible to the public. So he had a radio program where he would take questions from people and respond on the spot. This is from a different mode where he would take questions that were provided to him online. He wouldn't respond. He would give his response to his staff or his students, and they would write the response. So what we're going to be looking at is something written by his staff, not by him directly, but based on his sock. This is 2010. So we're talking, real contemporary. And the question he was asked is, if a person died without sons, is his daughter allowed to recite Kaddish to elevate his soul? And he starts by, it lightens the punishments of the soul after death. He goes on to say something that was not part of the question, that women can definitely not say Kaddish in the presence of 10 women, that it needs a minyan of men, because Kaddish is a davar shebekdusha. And one of the things that requires a minyan. And the question is, where is this coming from? It seems like it's coming totally out of left field. And I think what was going on there is, around that time, there was a rumor spreading among a lot of the women's tefillah groups that a major posek from Israel had in fact given a private sock that the women could say Kaddish in the women's tefillah group. So yes, to a group of women. That posek later, I don't remember, more common, rumor is too strong. When a lot of people were talking about it, he repudiated it. And I suspect that that's what Rav Ovadia is responding to here. But he is willing to consider the possibility of women saying Kaddish in front of 10 men. So he starts by talking about the Tshuva Me'ahava, which is the Ashkenazi posek, who talked about the practice of women saying Kaddish in the courtyard of the shul. And then this response goes on to say, and therefore it is clear from the words of the Tshuva Me'ahava that according to the halacha, one should not permit the recitation of Kaddish by women in the synagogue, since this is liable to bring great violations. And the sages of the Torah in general opposed such a practice. But in a different place, such as the home, or in an organized gathering in the women's section and the like, one should permit the recitation of Kaddish by daughters of those deceased who have not left sons in this world. And the essence of the halacha is in accordance with the words of the Tshuva Me'ahava. Therefore, in summary, one who passed away from this world and did not leave sons after him to elevate his soul, and merited to have righteous daughters who want to say Kaddish to elevate his soul, one should permit them to say Kaddish when they gather with a minyan of men in the house to say words of Torah. So he's bringing that back in. He's not limiting it to family members. Or after the reading of Tehillim, in whatever place it may be. However, in the main sanctuary of the synagogue, one should not institute recitation of Kaddish by a woman. Now, there's confusion here, because he talks about the main sanctuary of the synagogue, and the language here is Ulam Hagadol Shel Beit HaKnesset, the big hall. Yet he does have some reference to women's section. So it's not clear whether he's saying not at all in shul, or perhaps he's opening the door to say in the women's section of the shul, they can say Kaddish. Again, amorphous, ambiguous. It's hard to know whether this is Rav Ovadia being intentionally fuzzy, whether this is his staff not understanding him. But it's out there, and it's a lot closer to where we want to get than any of the Sfardim before. But note, he still assumes that leave any sons. the fault seems to be if there were sons, this issue never even arises. So let's go back now to some more contemporary views and the Ashkenazi side. And I see we're going to probably run over a bit. If people have to leave at 12, feel free. I guess you'll be able to listen to the recording. But if you can stick around, I'd love that. So about the same time as Rav Uziel, we have the book Gesher HaChaim by Rav Yechiel Michael Tukachinsky. This is a book published in 1947. And it's a three-part book. The first part is like a guidebook of halacha. The second part is actual tshuvo. And the third part is a more philosophical discussion of life after death. And this excerpt comes from the first part. So it's from the guidebook part. The main benefit of Kaddish is for the son to say it for his father and mother. And if he did not leave a son, but only a daughter, if she is a minor, under age 12, there are many places that permit her to recite Kaddish in the shul after Aleinu and after Shir Shalom or before Baruch She'amar. Those are the places where we still say Mourners Kaddish today. Again, he's talking about a minor, under age 12. And there are places that do not permit her to recite it in the shul at all. Only if there is a minyan in her house can she recite Kaddish. And they do not permit an adult daughter to recite Kaddish in shul under any circumstances. So here, he's describing the practice. He's not telling you what the halachic requirements are. And he's differentiating. He's saying the young girl in some places has been allowed to say Kaddish in shul, but the adult daughter has not. And again, it's got to be that this sort of kind of concern, even though he doesn't spell anything out about that. Moving to a much more contemporary tshuva on this topic, we now have something from 1990. This was released by Eretz Chemda. Eretz Chemda is a place that provides advanced learning to rabbis. They view themselves as sort of halachic guide people for rabbis throughout the world. Many rabbis come to take a sabbatical and study with them. And they're the people who are behind the Tzurba books that you guys are learning from. And a lot of what they do is responding to questions from all over the world. And so this is a question that they got, whether a woman could recite Kaddish for her deceased husband quietly from the women's section of the shul if the deceased had no sons. This is the first time we're hearing about a wife reciting Kaddish. But again, the assumption is still that if there were sons, we wouldn't be having this question. So he starts by talking about the purpose of Kaddish is to sanctify God's name, to atone for the sins of the deceased, and it's a way that the mourner shows acceptance of the death, that, God has decreed this and I can accept it. Then he goes on. And seemingly, these reasons are also applicable even to a woman. And therefore, there was room to permit a woman to recite Kaddish. However, the consensus of the Achronim is not to permit a woman to recite Kaddish in the shul. There are those who permitted a woman to recite Kaddish in her home. However, the poskim who disagreed with this view increased, and they forbade it because of the weakening of the customs. In our case, if the woman recites Kaddish in a regular voice from the women's section, there is room to permit it, and there is no weakening of the customs. With this, it is worthwhile to point out that there is a simpler option, and that is that the woman may hire a man who will recite Kaddish. So he starts by saying, in theory, a woman should be able to say Kaddish. The reasons for not allowing her to say it in shul don't seem to apply anymore. So the underpinning here, I think, is the Chavot Yair, who, talked about the weakening of customs, and perhaps that was because he was afraid that people would be creating breakaway minions, and that's no longer a concern by 1990. There were a million minyanim on every street corner in Israel, so the breakaway minion issue is no longer an issue. And if the concern that the Achronim had was just something wrong about a private minion at home, that's not an issue here either, because the woman is already in the shul in the women's section. So he's basically saying whatever the concern was coming out of the Chavot Yair doesn't apply anymore. There's no reason to prohibit a woman from saying Kaddish. But again, he's pointing to, I think, the sociology here, that the easier option, he's assuming there are going to be shuls that are going to be resistant. And therefore, rather than the woman fight to say Kaddish in the shul, she should just take the easy way out and hire somebody to say Kaddish. Okay, in the United States, what you've got is, I think, much more debate than the contemporary goings on in Israel. And I'm not quite sure why that is. The starting point in the United States seems to be a tshuva by Rabbi Yosef Eliyahu Henkin, and he wrote this in 1946. And he starts by remembering that when he was a child in Europe, there were young girls who would recite Kaddish in front of the men. And he then says, there are a lot of men who start coming to shul because they're saying Kaddish, and it grows on them. And as a result, they become more frequent minyan goers, and they become closer to Judaism. And he then wants to extend that as a reason to allow women to say Kaddish. And so what he says is, and for this reason itself, one should also not rebuff the young girls, since it, saying Kaddish, causes closeness to Judaism. And indeed, it is proper that she should stand behind the mechitza, and there she should pray, and also there she should recite Kaddish. And if she should push and enter in front of the mechitza at the time of Kaddish, since undoubtedly also others are saying Kaddish according to the current custom that many say Kaddish together, it does not bother us. So I think part of the underpinning here is us. He's not focusing on the tznius so much as the idea that earlier the custom was only a single person would say Kaddish sort of as a representative for everybody. And that there was something unseemly about the woman being the representative, that it looks too close to being a shaliach tzibur. And he says, but that reason doesn't apply anymore either, because now everybody says Kaddish. Yeah. When the woman says Kaddish, there's no reason to think that she's any different than, everybody else who's saying it for themselves. They're not saying it for the community. but he got a lot of pushback. And so in 1948, there was a book of Tshuvot published by Rav Avraham Binyamin Zilberberg, who was born in Poland but was living in the United States at the time. That seems to be almost a direct response to Rav Henkin, even though he doesn't name him. Rav Zilberberg says, in Poland, he never heard of a woman saying Kaddish in a shul, and that since the Achronim forbade it, not for us to undo that. Clearly, it brings evil, not reward, and we should continue not allowing women to say Kaddish in shul. And he also raises the idea that, hey, this is the United States, the land of the ignoramus. People don't know any better, and people might think that the fact that she's saying Kaddish means that she can also count for the minyan. Again, no idea why, but he's just assuming widespread ignorance.
About what year was this?
1948.
48.
So, yeah, he's probably not so far off about widespread ignorance, but there still are rabbis around who are knowledgeable. That this is, the lay people might be ignorant, but there's a rabbinate already. There's an Orthodox rabbinate already. And then, even more appalling is a responsum by Rav Shlomo Warman, published in 1981. Okay, we're talking totally modern times, 1981.
Excuse me, could you raise the screen?
I don't have this quote for you.
Oh, okay.
Again, you can get all of these quotes, and some of them are pretty long, in the Rachel Berkovitz article. We're already over. This could probably be a 2-hour thing if I tried to provide everything that she provided. Her sources and her discussion of the sources is well worth reading. So back to Rabbi Warman. He says the women's section is a separate domain. And so when a woman is saying Kaddish in the women's section, she's not even saying it in the presence of a minyan. And he bases this on the Aruch HaShulchan, Rav Yechiel Michal Epstein. But the Aruch HaShulchan was being written in Europe in, the late 1880s, early 1900s. And the shul architecture in Europe at that time was probably still largely a mechitza that ran all the way to the ceiling. And so the women really were almost in a separate room. Mm-hmm. But in 1981, that's clearly not the case. There are mechitzas, in modern shuls that women can see over. And, while there might be an occasional shul that still has a floor to ceiling mechitza, it's disingenuous to talk about the women's section being so totally outside of the shul that the woman is not part of the, saying the Kaddish in the presence of a minyan. And then he also gives the same policy reason that Rav Zilberberg gave, that if women say Kaddish, people will think that they can be part of a minyan. And it seems to me, even though I haven't seen anybody else say it, that the undercurrent to him is, this is 1981, the growth of feminism. And the fact that you've got now conservative and reform women who are pushing for women's tefillah groups, more active women participation in prayer. Even among the Orthodox, you're starting to see Rosh Chodesh groups. I believe late 70s was when Lincoln Square started having women dancing with the Sefer Torah. and maybe even a service around it. And so I think he's responding to this fear of feminism more than anything else, in terms of real halachic issues. And then we move to Rav Yehuda Henkin, who is the grandson of the Rav Henkin we just quoted.
Yes.
And he's basically trying to defend his grandfather's position. And he has written a lot about women. And he's also written about women saying Kaddish. And so he starts with the argument about, hey, in Europe, maybe the mechitza ran all the way to the ceiling, but that just doesn't apply anymore. Kind of don't say women are not saying Kaddish in the presence of a minyan. And he says, hey, in the earlier poskim, they were dealing with the custom where a single person was saying Kaddish for everyone. And so, yeah, maybe it looked like the woman was acting as a shaliach tzibor. She was the one saying Kaddish for everybody. But again, this doesn't apply anymore. So, it's a fake reason. However, he says the historical concern about a woman being the only person saying Kaddish, he wants to give some weight to that. And therefore, he says, even today, women can say Kaddish, but if the woman is the only mourner, one of the men should say Kaddish at the same time she does. This is the first time we're seeing that as sort of an independent halachic requirement that he tags on to women saying Kaddish. But it's not, and a lot of shuls jumped on this, and it became a very common thing in the Young Israel West Hempstead, I don't know, back in the 90s, I think that was still the position. It may continue to be, I don't know.
It's Chaim also.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, Bert
I used
says,
to say it with you.
right. Not clear if that was his requirement or he just thought it was better. But again, many shuls were requiring that and may still be requiring it today. But what Rav Henkin does is that there's a little bit of a silver lining to this cloud. He looks at the fact that Rav Moshe Feinstein, who doesn't have a tshuva dealing with women saying Kaddish, but in a tshuva dealing with when you need to have a mechitza, had a sort of an aside, a statement that in the past, an occasional woman would wander into the men's section to collect tzedakah or to say Kaddish. And he concluded that if it's that occasional kind of thing, that's okay. But for a small number of women who are regularly there, you need a mechitza. And so based on that discussion of mechitza by Rav Feinstein, Rav Henkin concludes that needing the man is only a problem if the woman is saying Kaddish on a regular basis and she's the only one doing it. But if normally there's another man there and just once in a while she's the only person, he says that's okay. And that's the quote I gave you here. And he tags it on as a footnote to something else, I don't remember what, a different aspect of Kaddish. And he says, in the responsim of Chabot Yair, it is explicit that he is dealing with the recitation of Kaddish by a daughter in a fixed manner throughout the entire year. But in an occasional manner, it is halakhically permissible. And from here we can conclude that with a mourner in the women's section, if she regularly recites Kaddish with the male mourners, and one day it happened that there were no male mourners, she can recite Kaddish by herself, since it is only an occasional occurrence. And he also takes a stand in some of his other writings that the concern that some of the poskim had about modesty and distraction go away as long as she's in the women's section. And so, he's moved us forward a little bit, but he's added this caveat that unfortunately makes it still hard for women to say Kaddish in many places. Okay, we're almost done. The Rav, Joseph Soloveitchik, is famous for not writing down his psak. And he similarly did not write anything on the issue of women and Kaddish. But Rachel Berkovitz quotes many of his students and congregants as confirming that he had no problem with a woman saying Kaddish, even if she was the only person saying Kaddish in the shul. The Rav's brother, Rav Aaron Soloveitchik, did write a tshuva on this topic, and this is going to be our last source. He also starts with the view of the Chavot Yair that by letter of the law, a daughter could say Kaddish if the deceased did not have a son. But again, that the Chavot Yair thought as a policy matter that was bad because it would weaken the customs of Israel. And Rav Soloveitchik turns that on its head. And he says, and it appears that nowadays, when a number of Jewish men and women are fighting for the equality of women vis-a-vis men on the issue of aliyot for women, if the Orthodox rabbis prevent a woman from reciting Kaddish in a place where it is halachically possible, as a result, the influence of conservative and reform rabbis will increase. In that case, it is forbidden for them, meaning the rabbis, to prevent a daughter from reciting Kaddish. So he's saying, hey, you're so concerned about weakening Jewish customs. Well, you're only encouraging the weakening of Jewish customs if you say that women can't say Kaddish. Halachically, there's no problem with it, and you're just driving them into the hands of the conservative and reform movement. And so he actually says it is forbidden for the rabbis to prevent a daughter from reciting Kaddish. And so what we've got here through this brief or not so brief survey is we end up with a situation where there seems to be a fairly strong sense that there's no halachic prohibition against women saying Kaddish. There's a sense that a parent as a son would. But in practice, you still have a variety of situations. You have some shuls that are very welcoming to women saying Kaddish. And on the other hand, you still have shuls where women feel decidedly unwelcome, uncomfortable, whether it's because there are men sitting in the women's section, or there is no women's section, or the women's section is locked, or people give her stares. So we're not there yet. But hopefully this provides enough ammunition for people who want to argue that there is absolutely no reason a woman can't say Kaddish let me turn it over to you guys for questions, comments.
You know what, did Rabbi Linzer have anything to say about this? I assume he's moderate about this.
I assume Rabbi Linzer does not have a problem, but I have no idea of whether he's actually written about it. I would think he thinks this is a fait accompli, that this is not something that he has to think about.
And and for sure, the Bayit encourages women to say Kaddish.
Right, the Bayit is very encouraging to women.
The
In
Chabad,
fact, that
I'm sorry, the Chabad of Riverdale,
Go ahead,
Rabbi
go ahead.
Shem Tov, you can't say Kaddish at Chabad. And I'm
Uh-huh.
not sure about RJC. In RJC, you could stand up and say it, but I don't think it's encouraged. I don't know anybody go to RJC. Milt, I think the women say Kaddish there, don't they? In the Hashkama?
Yes, I would say mostly yes, if they,
They do say it with the men, but I don't think it's, encouraged. I think at RJ and HIR, it's the only place where they actually say and they encourage women to stand up and do it. So
Other questions, comments?
I think it was a thorough review. I mean, it was just unbelievable the amount of research that you presented. And it shows you that from history, I like the opinion of Rabbi Soloveitchik. I think it's Rabbi Soloveitchik that's saying that you don't want to lose people to Reformed and conservatism. How much, and it doesn't really, if they're saying it with men and there's a mechitza, halachically, there should be nothing wrong with it, kind of.
There should be nothing wrong with it, and there are many poskim that you can point to who say there's nothing wrong with it, but you still somehow have this sense that from a policy perspective, from a sociology perspective, there's still some sense of this isn't how it's supposed to be. And I don't quite understand it, but I think it's still there in a lot of places.
I think I told Bert at one of our classes that my sister-in-law lost her mother about a year ago. And the synagogue, lives in Highland Park, and she goes to Ahavat Yisrael. It's a small synagogue. They're trying to increase. She wasn't able at the Shiva to say Kaddish. The men
Really?
came in and did the whole service. She wasn't able to say it.
When I was saying Kaddish for my mother, so we're now 2002, they held a Shiva minyan in my house because my brother was there and was also saying Kaddish. We didn't have a mechitza, but they had me stand like in a different room. And so I was saying Kaddish, whether the men heard me or not, I have no idea. And then when I told the rabbi that I intended to continue to come to shul and say Kaddish, he actually said, your saying Kaddish does not do any good for the neshama of your mother.
Oh,
And therefore, Bert should say Kaddish because that's the one that counts. If you feel better by saying Kaddish, I'm not going to stop you, but it's a useless, it's not accomplishing anything. 2002. And this is a modern Orthodox shul. This is a YU Musmach who in his side job was a lawyer. I mean, I was flabbergasted. I still point to that as rabbinic malpractice. But
that's interesting.
I have a question. Can I ask a question and make a comment?
Sure.
Okay, the question I wonder, Bert, do you know, or does anybody on this call know what is the practice of the Young Israel Rabbi Willig's shul? the young Israel of Riverdale with regard to women saying Kaddish?
I don't know the answer to that. I'll find out though.
I don't think they do, because I was
No.
there. I don't think they do. Absolutely
Ab-
not.
Yeah, absolutely not.
Okay, the other
Okay,
comment,
no.
actually a
Yeah, and the RJC, individual women definitely do say Kaddish.
yes,
It
because
depends on the family, the individual family.
I did, yes. And I have an additional comment with regard to the whole problem that some of the rabbis, as you so authoritatively outlined, were saying that it's immodest for women to participate, et cetera, et cetera. I know of a case where a shidduch actually came out of a woman coming to a shiva house. And I don't know about saying Kaddish or Kaddish or anything, but about the separation of the sexes can go
It leads
against
to something good.
the main goal of producing more Jews.
Interesting.
Okay.
Anybody else, or shall we bring this to a close?
When I was saying Kaddish for my father, people asked me, don't I have brothers that can say it? Like they had the nerve to ask me when they saw that I was saying Kaddish, and it was at Vacation Village, a young Israel at Vacation Village. I was shocked at their attitude. Like lots of people don't have sons, they only have daughters. And why shouldn't my prayer be just as valid as a son's prayer?
What year was this, Carol?
In
What
fact,
what year was it?
Approximately.
Probably in the 1990s.
Thank you.
and my own attitude to some extent, is what rationale could it be that a person who doesn't even know the person, who, the deceased, is better, is better for saying Kaddish than somebody, than a daughter who knows the deceased. I mean, it boggles my mind, that would be the case. So yeah, go out and hire somebody to do it who's a total stranger.
But also, it's such an emotional time where you have a loss and you're so vulnerable. And it's so important to have support. And for someone to say that to you, that your prayer does not count, it's unethical. As you said, the term
Rabbinic malpractice.
Yeah.
What is it?
That's a new term, rabbinic malpractice.
Yeah. I mean, you understand that you have a loss, and to not be able to say that, it's just crazy. I know that in the synagogue and Ahavat Yisrael in Highland Park, there's a tremendous mechitza. So even if the women say it, it's not encouraged, the women do say it behind the mechitza, so the men don't hear it anyway. But they go so fast that some of the women can't keep up.
Well, in Highland Park, New Jersey, you can go to Horenstein's, place. I'm sure she encourages women to do it.
Yeah.
She, a recent graduate of Maharat.
There's lots of
Okay.
other synagogues in Highland Park.
I
She
understand.
another one. Take your money where you want to be.
But Gloria, you are so brilliant, and you are a model for other Rabbanits. It's so a pleasure to hear you and your chachma, and we hope to hear you again. Are you doing any future ones?
I'm not sure. I've got a list of topics that I'm interested in pursuing. But I have a fairly busy summer ahead of me, so I don't know when I'm going to get to it. And
But
if I do have something, I'll let you guys know.
I'm going to recruit you for my Tehillim group, and it'll be honorarium. So I'll get in touch with you. It won't be during the summer. We'll schedule something. I have a Tehillim group, and I'd love to have you come and speak.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
It was
Thank
really
you so
fascinating.
much.
Take care,
Thank you.
everybody.
Take
Thanks.
care, everybody.
Stay cool.
Have a good day.
Okay,
Enjoy the
bye.
rest of the